So, goblins are a big nuisance in the world of Goblin Slayer, from pillaging villages to kidnapping girls. Actually, nuisance might be too kind a word. The point is that something obviously needs to be done about them, but monster slaying is a pretty difficult job for normal people. That's where this whole system with the adventurers and the Adventurers Guild come in. It works like this. Individuals can take their request to the Adventurers Guild, who will then hook them up with capable adventurers who can step in, kill the monsters, and problem solved. With just that, this whole setup must sound like a pretty perfect solution. But the series does a good job of showing that the whole goblin slaying thing is a much more complicated issue than one might assume. There are plenty of things that get in the way of this system working like it's supposed to. I thought this would make for an interesting topic. So yeah, the focus of this video is going to be the hiccups with this system. Or I guess it might be better to say the complexities to it. Now, one of the earliest and I think clearest pieces of evidence that there is something wrong with the system is the unfortunate incident that is pretty much just all of episode 1. It opens up with Priestess first signing up to join the Adventurers Guild to become an official adventurer so she can help as many people as she can. Guild Girl proceeds to explain the basics to Priestess, including the guild's ranking system. Porcelain ranks like Priestess are the lowest rank. This is what's given to the newbies when they first start out. Meanwhile, silver ranks are the veteran adventurers. The only ones higher are gold and platinum, but those are very rare and are reserved for very important figures like legendary world-saving heroes. There are also a few others that bridge the gap between silver and porcelain, but honestly those are hardly brought up in the show, so I don't really feel like going over those. The rest can be something to look up on your own if you're that curious. Pretty much immediately after she finishes registering, Priestess is asked to join a group of fellow rookie adventurers on their quest. A goblin slaying quest to be more specific. After a little goading, she agrees and, despite some noticeable concern from Guild Girl, her group heads out. While Priestess has some worries early on, including how it seems that no one actually bought the proper supplies, the others are much more confident and try to ease her worries. They're just weak little goblins after all, they've totally got this. Then, let's see, how does this go again? Okay, gonna stop there. Point made, I think. So, their first mission ends with half of them dead and the other two traumatized and in need of saving themselves. After they get saved by a certain silver-ranked adventurer that just so happened to be passing by, Priestess gives this monologue explaining how this is apparently a rather common occurrence in this world. New adventurers will take on goblin slaying quest with great confidence only to end up getting slaughtered. She says how even the ones that do survive will often give up the life of adventuring. Notably, this monologue is played over this scene of the other surviving member of Priestess's party being carried away in a cart with a bunch of other traumatized goblin survivors, with just the deadest look in her eyes, while this other group of young, bright, smiling adventurers walk right past them, blissfully unaware of what happened, and very much resembling Priestess's own party prior to this whole ordeal. For me, this scene really gave this grim impression that this job is pretty much a revolving door of sorts. Now, one of the final things Priestess says here is,
"Tragedies like this happen all too often in this harsh world. But does it really have to be this way? I don't know the answer."
does it really have to be this way? I think this is actually the line that really got the gears in my head turning in the first place. Does it have to be this way? Well, what caused it to be this way in the first place? This isn't like a freak thing that just happened to this one group of adventurers. As the show itself points out, this is a consistent issue. And to me, that implies some sort of pattern. Now, goblin slaying is clearly dangerous work, and there needs to be some assumption of risk going in, But if goblin slaying is that dangerous, you have to wonder why they still send rookies after them in the first place. Again, the guild has a ranking system. You'd think that this would make sure adventurers stick to quests that are at their skill level. The thing about this is that porcelain-ranked adventurers can totally take on goblins. This is proven in the very next episode. In this one scene from episode 2, Guild Girl tells Priestess and Goblin Slayer that another group of rookies had left for a goblin slaying mission right before they arrived. Hearing about the group from Guild Girl, Priestess compares them to her previous party and wants to leave immediately to go save them. However, Goblin Slayer is firm on prioritizing this other quest. Later, we see the group Guild Girl described arrive back at the guild hall, assumedly victorious in their mission, proving that newbies can indeed do this work. If they couldn't, why would the guild send them? There's no benefit for them. They'd just be losing resources. Beyond that, we also see plenty of evidence that most of what that first batch of rookies was saying about goblins is pretty accurate. They aren't shown to be very strong or smart, except of course for some very rare exceptions. The belief that goblins are weak is not necessarily wrong, but it is a bit of a misleading simplification. Even weak monsters are still monsters. They're still dangerous even if they aren't as dangerous as some of the other kinds. They are small and weak, but they're also very sadistic, travel in groups, and are smart enough to use a bunch of tricks and traps. They can be tricky to deal with. With the widespread reputation of them being the weakest monster, though, it's not surprising that people tend to not be as careful with them as they should be. I think it should be pretty easy to see, even from just the little bit I showed, that a big part of what led Priestess's original party to disaster was their underestimation of the goblins. They really went on about how they were basically no big deal. They didn't take the proper precautions because why bother? It's not that they weren't necessarily capable of fighting them. They threw caution to the wind and made a bunch of stupid mistakes that gave the goblins the advantage. The misconception that goblins are just no big deal is clearly the common factor in why so many newbies get killed by them. Another problem with this perception of the goblins is that it discourages higher ranked adventurers from wanting to accept goblin slaying quests because it doesn't help with their reputation. Everyone sees them as weak, so there's not a lot of glory to come with slaying goblins, as compared to, say, slaying a dragon or a demon. Rather than glory, they'd more likely get other adventurers talking behind their back, questioning their capabilities and whether they really deserve their rank, which is something we see in the show with Goblin Slayer. Aside from that, I think we can also see this with Sword Maiden during the Watertown arc. She seems utterly mortified at the idea of asking for help against goblins because she's seen as such a powerful and important figure in this world.
Who could I tell? I'm the Sword Maiden after all. How could I ask for protection from mere goblins? No one would take me seriously.
This is especially understandable because of her particularly painful history with the goblins. Now, there are other types of kinks in the system too. As we see in the show, under the current setup, goblin slaying quests tend to pile up. It seems the guild has trouble keeping up with the amount of goblin slaying quests they get. There's a couple of reasons for this. The obvious is that goblins seem to be a pretty common issue. It's been stated in the show that goblins tend to multiply very quickly, and even when a horde of goblins is successfully taken care of, if any survivors are left, they can go on to start their own new horde. So it's pretty easy to see why there would be an overabundance of goblins. Meanwhile, the number of adventurers seem to be something of a concern for the guild as well. This has been brought up by Guild Girl in the show. In episode 5, Guild Girl interviews this one adventurer as part of a rank promotion exam. During this, it comes out that he's been stealing from his party mates, so Guild Girl punishes him, and the adventurer in question storms off. He almost attacks Guild Girl too. You might expect Guild Girl to be relieved to get rid of this guy, but no, it's the opposite.
There aren't enough adventurers these days.
And what he did wasn't necessarily illegal. I hope he accepts his demotion and takes on quests elsewhere.
This proves to me that the number of adventurers is something the guild has been struggling with. It's understandable. It's a dangerous job, and not many people probably even meet the requirements. It can be both mentally and physically taxing. Now, let's say, just to play it safe, the guild did raise the rank requirement for Goblin Slaying quest. That would clash with this other factor that needs to be taken into consideration, that being the limited quantity of adventurers available. Should the guild, say, outright forbid porcelain ranked adventurers from taking on Goblin Slaying quest, this would decrease the already apparently low pool of adventurers able or willing to take on Goblin Slaying quest, meaning even more would pile up, and that means there are more goblins out there who can then make even more goblins. The goblin problem wouldn't just get worse, it would get exponentially worse. Porcelain ranks may not always get the job done, but some do, and that portion that do can make a lot of difference. It's arguably worth the sacrifice. It's a cost versus benefit conundrum. Okay, that's all I have to say about that, so now let's talk about the financial factor. See, something else important to note about Goblin Slaying is that it doesn't really pay that much, which is obviously another aspect that discourages adventurers, particularly the higher ranked ones, from picking up Goblin Slaying quest. I know I've already brought up an example in this video of how adventurers aren't always the most virtuous people, so it might be tempting to blame pure greed here, but that's not all there is to this. I think back to this stuff Spearman said in episode 11. For adventurers, this is their job. This is how they make a living. They aren't heroes for charity. It's not wrong for them to want to be properly compensated for the dangerous work they do. Wanting the better paying jobs isn't too unreasonable. I mean, we don't really see a lot of adventurers in the series who seem to be rolling in excess cash. This might be a good time to point out that adventurers function essentially as independent contractors. Adventurers have to pay for their own equipment, as well as the regular upkeep of that equipment with money out of their own pocket. It doesn't come from the guild. We actually see Goblin Slayer himself getting his equipment checked out pretty regularly in the series. But I actually want to take a look at something else from the show, in episode 4 to be more precise. A lot of this episode follows these two porcelain-ranked adventurers, and it provides a good look into the plight of adventurers struggling to earn enough money to keep up their tools and supplies. One of them loses their sword during a quest, and can't afford to get a replacement. He needs money for a new weapon in order to do his job, but he also needs a weapon in order to do his job to earn money. It's quite the predicament. Now, higher-ranked adventurers with better equipment would obviously have higher expenditures.
I want a two-handed blade. Like that great sword he has.
Don't be an idiot. You'd collapse just trying to hold that thing. Not to mention, it costs money.
So, if the higher-ranked adventurers took on Goblin Slaying regularly, they would reasonably have to take a pay cut, and that pay cut would then affect the quality of their gear, and that could in turn lessen their overall effectiveness in the field, which could then possibly lead to them being demoted by the guild. So yeah, high-level adventurers would have reason to be discouraged from taking up low-paying jobs like Goblin Slaying. But okay, some might be wondering why they don't just offer higher rewards for Goblin Slaying then. The important thing to keep in mind here is where that reward money comes from. It has to come from somewhere. Going back once again to episode 2, there's a scene where this desperate farmer guy is trying to post an official Goblin Slaying quest through the guild. And we see that he has to scrounge up the money for the reward out of his own pocket. And it's obvious right away that he's not exactly the wealthiest guy out there. This whole event gives insight into why Goblin Slaying typically pays so little. Goblins themselves are weak, so in turn, they have to focus on weaker, more vulnerable targets. This means ideal targets for the goblins would include farms and smaller communities that are more isolated. These are the types of people who don't have an excessive amount of money to give toward what is essentially extreme pest control. Side note, this may also hint at a bit of classism, as goblins are more of a problem for the lower class to be concerned with. This could be another reason some adventurers avoid taking up goblin slaying quest. So, by now, some might be wondering about Goblin Slayer, aka the main character who specializes in slaying goblins that I've strangely not really talked that much about in this video up to this point. After all, he's a high-level adventurer and he takes on nothing but goblin slaying quest, yet he seems to be doing okay financially and maintaining his high rank. However, Goblin Slayer is a bit unusual, especially when compared to others of his rank, as many in the show are quick to point out, even himself. Goblin Slayer is a bit of an extreme in the context of this world. He is obsessed with killing goblins. He's studied them for years, and his arsenal has been specifically adapted around slaying goblins. It's very efficient, and it's also very cheap. He doesn't deal with expensive equipment and high upkeep cost. In this one episode, it's directly commented how he wouldn't use a high-grade sword because it would be a waste on goblins. Instead, Goblin Slayer prefers cheap, disposable tools. In fact, he sometimes just takes the weapons from the goblins he kills. He doesn't even clean his armor because that actually helps throw off the goblin's strong sense of smell. Goblin Slayer was actually the one those two newbies went to for advice when they were having budget troubles. Also, because he is more experienced and is specialized in goblin slaying, it would make sense that he is able to kill more goblins in less time than other adventurers do. Therefore, he would end up earning more total income killing goblins than other adventurers. Really, once you lay it all out, I think it becomes really clear just how much of a godsend Goblin Slayer must have seemed to those running the guild. I can't help but recall this one line where Guild Girl told Goblin Slayer that even if others don't appreciate what he does, because, they see it as just killing weak little goblins, the work he does is important, so he should be more proud of himself. I think this whole video could serve to emphasize how important Goblin Slayer truly is. He just fits this perfect niche the guild system was in desperate need of being filled. He knows goblins inside and out, he's very motivated to hunt them down, he can do the work of several rookie adventurers all on his own, plus he's okay to work for cheap. Because of all this, he manages to save a lot of people that would have otherwise probably been left behind by this system. And seriously, it's no wonder why Guild Girl has a crush on him, he clearly makes her life so much easier. Honestly, I feel like I could stop this video there, but there is one other thing I'd like to add on here. I would like to take the time to praise how this show actively avoids pushing all the blame for these problems with the system onto any one person or group. Like, while I have been talking about the flaws of the guild system, I don't think the show actually paints too negative a picture of the guild itself. It's not that those working at the Adventurers Guild don't care about the lives of the adventurers, or that they're simply incompetent. It's just a very difficult situation that they're trying to get control of. Also, it isn't as if they aren't trying to do anything to try to fix some of the issues. Guild Girl reveals that the guild is planning on opening a training hall where more experienced adventurers can train rookie adventurers and better prepare them for the field. This to me shows that they're trying, and I think that's an important detail. There's also this other scene I'd really like to talk about. Now, this scene is from the Watertown arc, like near the beginning when Goblin Slayer and his allies first meet up with Sword Maiden to hear her out about the goblin crisis threatening the citizens of the city. Lizard Priest inquires from Sword Maiden why the city guard or the army aren't taking care of the city's goblin problem. It's here that I would expect most other anime to go ahead and paint the soldiers as lazy or uncaring or even corrupt, make them these two-dimensional straw men that only exist in order for the show to have someone the heroes can outshine and put in their place to make the heroes look all the more noble and strong by comparison. Seriously, I feel like this is something that can be seen in a lot of anime. However, that's not the approach this show takes. Just listen.
Were you told there was no point in mobilizing the military against mere goblins?
I suppose you can't really blame them. There are still plenty of demons running around the capital after all. With the military spread thin, goblin slaying is a job for us adventurers.
Yeah, they don't vilify the soldiers for not helping. They instead acknowledge that the soldiers have their hands full with more pressing issues. Going after the goblins would just mean taking their attention away from another threat, the invading demon army. Everyone has their own circumstances. Everyone has their part to play, and this particular responsibility has fallen to them. They can't just blame someone else for not taking on the job themselves, especially when they have their own responsibilities to deal with. Okay, the last scene I want to bring up is this interesting moment after the Demon Lord is defeated by the hero. Cowgirl's uncle says to Goblin Slayer how the Demon Lord's defeat should make his life a lot easier. That's how it's supposed to work after all. Once the big bad guy is defeated, then all the problems are solved, and everyone lives happily ever after. However, Goblin Slayer then assures him that there's still going to be goblins that need to be slayed. And what do you know? It's after the Demon Lord is defeated that the Goblin Lord crisis happens, proving Goblin Slayer right. I really like the inclusion of this scene. I feel like it's calling out that old cliche that once the big bad guy is killed, that suddenly makes all the problems in the world get automatically solved. However, obviously, in the real world, it's rarely ever that simple. It's not that the Demon King wasn't a bad guy doing bad things and the world isn't going to be a more peaceful place now, but it'd be over-assuming to attribute all the bad things to him. The cause of the problems here wasn't some big bad guy corrupting the system. It's just this complex web of conflicting social and economic issues. Maybe it's just me, but this is kind of refreshing, especially coming from a fantasy show. Not that that other kind of narrative is inherently a bad one, but I feel it could be considered overused. I think it's good to have this different perspective represented. It's unfortunate to say, but I do feel that both in fiction and in the real world, there are many that have the habit of simplifying these very big, complex issues and just find this one simple scapegoat to pin all the blame on. It just makes it easier that way, but this can be problematic. It can just make it harder to find a working solution when you don't know or properly acknowledge what actually caused the problem. There are plenty of complicating factors that can sometimes go overlooked by normal people, like public perception, resource management, and funding. Honestly, there's a lot of real-world comparisons I could bring up, and normally that is the kind of thing I love to include in my videos, but in this case, I'm going to hold back on any direct comparisons because, frankly, I don't want to risk getting too political. I feel like that's just asking for trouble on the internet. This is the kind of stuff people get really passionate about. I fear if I did, people might start to veer away from the topic of Goblin Slayer, which is what this video is meant to be about. But I'll still insist to those listening to try to think of some real-world issues that you yourself think are comparable to these things I brought up. I think there are a lot out there. Okay, one last time, I just have to say how much I love how Goblin Slayer portrays goblin slaying as this very complex issue. I think this complexity makes it a lot more realistic, and consequently a lot more relatable. And something I don't want to forget to mention is how I really appreciate that this stuff isn't like all spelled out in just one big expositional monologue, but instead it's in these small little moments thrown in here and there that, when put together, paint a bigger, clearer picture of just how this world works. Okay. At this point, I think I'm officially tapped out. So, I hope I was able to get across why I find this whole side of the Goblin Slayer series so fascinating. But anyway, thank you all out there for listening.
The Goblin Slayer swung his blade, fierce wretchedness he now would purify. Goblin corpses he cut through as the heads flew high. Oh, courageous warrior, with a sword that's tempered in perfect silver, never will the blade betray its purpose or its way.